Dream a little dream of me. Welcome kindreds, it's Jessica TheStoryWitch and this is episode 4 in the Astrology for Witches series that I'm making here on my channel. So we've already talked about the signs and what that kind of wheel of signs means, and we've talked about the houses and those two wheels superimposed on top of each other. So it is time to start talking about the planets. I have been putting this off a little bit because this is where things can start to get complicated, but what I've decided to do is to break it down into, today we're only going to look at the Ascendant, the Sun and the Moon placements, and then we will take it from there as far as the other planets goes. And I'm not going to talk about aspects or anything like that yet, or transits or anything like that. We are literally going to take it step by step because that is how I wanted this series to be. I wanted just to kind of build a little bit onto it each time, because I know astrology can get very complicated very quickly, and so this is supposed to be a kind of simple and streamlined way into it. So let's get on with it. So the first thing I want to talk about today is the Ascendant. Now the Ascendant is not a planet. The Ascendant is simply it's a marker. So when you were born, and this is why in your horoscope you need to know the time that you're born as accurately as possible, because the planet that is on the horizon at the time, not the planet, sorry, the sign that is on the horizon at the time when you were born becomes your ascendant. So for example, if you were born at like 2 a.m. then your ascendant would be one sign, and then if you were born like 2 hours later, then the ascendant would already be in another sign. So that is why it's important to have as accurate a birth time as possible, because this can definitely change. Why is the ascendant important? Well, once you've determined the ascendant, that determines the first house. So if you look back at the last video, which is the video where I talked about the houses, you can see that the houses are actually very important, because the way that they map onto the signs shows kind of which areas of our lives we are most likely to express in the way that the sign is kind of encompassing. So the ascendant is almost like it becomes the first kind of slice of the pie. And also the ascendant sign is very important because it influences, it's almost like a lens that you end up then looking through the whole zodiac with. So whatever planet is, whatever sign is there on the ascendant is really, really important, because that becomes house 1, and then all the other houses will follow on from that. I hope you understand what I'm talking about. So yeah, for me, my ascendant is in Libra. So Libra is my first house. And again, I do like the whole sign system. There's lots of the whole sign system. There are lots and lots of different ways of doing it. But if you do it with the whole signs, they do match up exactly with the signs and the houses. So you don't end up having like weird breaks between where the houses and signs are in different places. So if you are used to using a different house system, that's totally fine, but I'm going to be talking about whole signs, and it mainly will correspond to other stuff, to other ways of looking at it as well, but whole signs is easier, I feel, especially for beginners. But also I think it's still a very valid system. It is going back into kind of traditional astrology. They would have used whole signs, so it's not like a kind of simplistic, it is just more simple. So simple can also be very, very effective, so that's why I recommend it. So yeah, like I say, Libra is where my ascendant is, so I look at that, my whole zodiac, through that kind of Libran, balanced, airy lens. Whereas somebody who has maybe got like a Scorpio ascendant would be looking at their whole horoscope through a more watery, emotional, scorpionic lens. So yeah, it is very, very important. So do you know your ascendant? That is something that you're going to definitely want to work out. If you've printed out your chart, you'll see on the left hand side of the chart, it'll just have an AC, and that will show you where your ascendant is. It may not, it won't fall exactly within exactly on the start of a certain sign, but it will be there and you'll be able to see it as a point. So AC is ascendant. Whoa, the wind's blowing in through the window. That's probably my eerie Libra ascendant coming into play with us as well. So yeah, find out your ascendant, because that, and often people will say that people will be more like their ascendant. So sometimes if somebody's trying to, you know, it's cheesy and it's a little bit naff, but people will say, oh yeah, I can guess your sign. And they may, you know, if they are tuned into astrology and they know the kind of characteristics of the signs, they will sometimes get it wrong and think that you are your ascendant sign rather than your sun sign, because the ascendant, like I say, it is your kind of modus operandus in the world is very much coming from your ascendant. And what I have found, you know, like sometimes they'll have like compatibility charts, synastry charts between certain people. They'll say, oh, these sun signs go well together, these sun signs don't go well together, that kind of thing. But what I find generally is that you will, regardless of your sun or moon placements, you will tend to get on well with other people who have the same ascendant ruler as you. Or if your sun, we will talk about, I don't know if we will talk about ascendant rulers, maybe we will. That might be for another video. But if your ascendant matches up well, if it's good synastry with their sun placement, then often I find that that works fine too. You know, there's always, with astrology, there's always mitigating factors because everybody's charts are so unique. So there, you know, there might be other things coming into play which mean that you and that other person really aren't compatible. But in general, that seems to work in more general terms. So yes, your ascendant, it's not a planet, it is just the sign that was on the horizon when you were born, and it determines your first house, and because of that, it determines the kind of lens that you look at the whole of your rest of your chart through. And it also kind of gives the person whose ascendant that is the characteristics. They will express the characteristics of their ascendant sometimes more readily than they do of their sun and their moon placements. Especially I've found if the ascendant is in a kind of more socially acceptable sign, you know, like how in, like, there's no good or bad. I've been talking about this all the way through this series, that there's no like kind of good characteristic of a sign and bad character. Our value judgments are cultural, so we might say, oh, I would prefer the characteristics of this sign rather than the characteristics of this sign because they fit better with how our society likes things to be. But there is no kind of like innate good or bad in these things. They just are, you know, they just are, as in like a lion just is, you know, there's not like an innate good or bad, it's just a cultural good and bad. But if your ascendant is in a sign which is more socially, culturally acceptable, then sometimes people will kind of gravitate into that ascendant more so even than they do to their sun, and they may not express their sun sign so fully if it is one that is kind of less socially acceptable. Perhaps like if, especially if you're a woman and perhaps your sun placement is a more kind of Martian and aggressive placement, then like say you've got an Aries sun, for example, and you're quite dominant and you know, you're assertive and kind of go-getting, but those characteristics weren't approved of, especially in early life perhaps, and then your ascendant perhaps is in something like Cancer, which is watery and kind of very nourishing and nurturing, and those characteristics were praised when you were, especially as in your early life, because that ascendant is in that first house, is very dominant in our early life. You might end up expressing in the world more as a Cancerian than you do as an Arian. But that is not necessarily the truth. That is more a way of kind of pigeonholing ourselves into a kind of culturally appropriate mode of expression. So that is something definitely to look at. Look at your ascendant and sort of think about the qualities of the sign, and you can go back and watch the signs video where I talked about the different qualities of the different signs, and sort of think, do I resonate with this more than I do with my sun and my moon? You know, it's something to look at and just be aware of, because we all have all of the planets in our chart, we all have an ascendant, we all have all the signs, so there is possibility to kind of not always be totally truthful with our full expression, because we want to fit in, because we want to be accepted and liked by others. So that's just, it's just something to look out for. So that is the ascendant. I'm not going to go through and talk about like if you have your ascendant and if your ascendant is this, then you're going to be this, if your ascendant is this, because honestly there's so much information out there, and you know, you can easily find that, and you can find much more than I would be able to give, and it would be boring, you know, to go through all the different ones like that. So I've decided not to do that. I just wanted to talk about it more generally. And then let's talk about sun. So when people say what is your star sign, they mean your sun sign. So, you know, that is the sign that muggles know. They know usually. I don't think I've met anybody yet who honestly didn't know. Like some people will kind of feign total disregard for it and be like, oh yeah, no, I don't even know. And usually they're lying. There might be some people, I guess, who really don't, but usually at some point in their life people will have encountered the fact that they are a certain sun sign. And it's why astrology comes in for a lot of flack, because people are like, how can you just kind of pigeonhole a whole bunch of people that are born between these two dates as all the same? And like, obviously, as I've been talking about in this series from the beginning, there are so many other factors into play that obviously we are not saying that all the people between these two dates are all going to be exactly the same. What we are saying is that their sun is in the same sign. So all those people will have their sun, like all the people born between like the 21st of May and the 21st of June will all have their sun in Gemini. There or thereabouts, you know, the dates aren't always exactly spot on for that. They will express that Gemini sun. My sun sign is Gemini, and I express that by being quite chatty and easygoing and playful and fun. People, they generally have a good sense of humour. They will usually be kind. They will look for the kind of good in the situation. If things are looking shitty, then they will normally look to, you know, they're optimists. Geminis are generally optimists. But of course, those people will have their moon in other places. They will have lots of other planets going on in other things. So they may not all express that kind of sunny Geminian personality. Or, you know, you could look at all the people who have their sun in Capricorn, and they will be more practical and earthy. They will work hard. They will really kind of, you know, and I'm kind of going back into what I talked about in the signs before. And I don't want to do that again. And that's why I'm not going to talk about that for every sign. But what I'm saying is there will be shared characteristics, but there are also lots of other mitigating factors which will come into play, which will make people less or more prominent in that sign. And one of the major things that is the house placement. So yes, my sun is in Gemini, but somebody who's got a Gemini sun in the 8th house would express it very differently from somebody who has a Gemini sun, say, in the 1st house. You know, if you have your Gemini sun in the 1st house, which means your ascendant is also Gemini, so you kind of got a double Gemini thing going on there, then you will be more Geminian. You know, you will be, that's the sort of person you could easily place usually as being Geminian. But you also might be, because it's kind of governing your early life, that 1st house, you're more likely to express the Gemini qualities. Whereas if you've got somebody with a Gemini sun in the 8th house, the house of kind of relationships, death and sex and kind of more shadowy type stuff, that person may not express their Gemini sun so openly. They might even keep their Gemini sun sign more hidden, and perhaps if their ascendant is in something more kind of palatable, like say Libra or Cancer or something like that, then they may not come across as a Gemini at all, but that Gemini sun is still there. People say the sun is where you shine. So if you look at in your chart the placement of your sun, the sign that it is in is how you shine, but the house that it is in is where you shine. So if you go back to the houses video where I talked about what each house kind of, which part of our lives the house encompasses. Like say you have a Gemini sun in the 10th house, the house of kind of career, ambition, things like that, then usually that person will be shining their Gemini and kind of communication skills in their career. So you'll probably find that that person will be like a writer, or they might be a journalist, something like that, you know, so they're bringing that Gemini sun into that career sphere. Or perhaps you'll have somebody with Gemini in the 7th house, their Gemini sun in the 7th house, and they will be expressing that through in the realm of relationships. So they're very Geminian in relationships. They'll be kind of easygoing. They may be fickle. They may be a flirt. They will be a flirt. You know, it's that the house placement is very, very important too. So even though we're saying like that whole chunk of time is Gemini sun time or Cancer sun time, the house that those people have their suns in will determine where in their life they're most likely to shine those qualities, you know. Sometimes as well, people can kind of become disconnected from their sun sign, and they can feel like they don't shine. And in that case, I find you can remediate that. You can reconnect with your sun sign and try and find sometimes it will be because, like I was talking about, say you've got you've got a sun in Aries, and you were not appreciated for being a go-getter, for being assertive, especially perhaps if that is in relationships, if it is in your 7th house, then or perhaps if it was like in your 3rd house and you're assertive in your relationships with your kind of community, your family, then that doesn't always go down well, and so that sun can kind of be suppressed and kind of pushed into shadow. But then when you do that, you're like really pushing down a core part of your being. So look at your sun sign, think, how do I express the qualities of this sign? Look at the house, think, where do I express the qualities of this sign? Which part of my life, which aspect of my life am I expressing this? And if you're not expressing it, think, why is that? And you can use cards and things as well to maybe help you to find your missing sun. Because if life feels like it's not shiny, like you don't feel like you shine anywhere, then usually that is because for some reason, something that has happened to you has meant that your sun has been pushed into shadow. So that is definitely something to look at. And you may well, like I said before, you may well start expressing yourself more in terms of your ascendant rather than your sun. So yeah, it's really interesting to kind of psychologically pick ourselves apart in this way, but it's helpful as well as interesting, because it's a definite partner with shadow work sometimes, and it definitely can make our lives better, because it allows us to access parts of us that we have locked away, pushed away, you know, usually because of interactions that have happened to us where other people have made us feel like that we can't express in that way which feels natural to us. So yeah, that is definitely something to look at. And there are definitely easier placements for your sun. You know, certain signs are easier and express their suns easier than others, but we will talk about that in another video. And I won't talk about ascendant rulers this time. We'll talk about ascendant rulers, and we'll talk about things like exaltation and stuff like that in another video, because that's just going to make things overcomplicated here, so we won't. So find your sun and see which sign it is in, which house it is in, and see if you feel like you are shining, see if you're connecting with that sun. And then the third one I wanted to talk about today, the other part of the big three, they're called the big three, the ascendant, the sun and the moon. Have I already said this? People call them the big three in astrology because they're kind of like the really inner core of our personality. So the moon sign. Now this is a very interesting one, and I have definitely found that if you were born at night, then sometimes your moon sign is where you shine more than your sun sign. But the moon sign, because of the nature of the moon, because it is inherently that kind of more, and I should have talked about this with the sun. I'll come back and talk a little bit about the sun like that too. But let's talk about the moon and what the moon represents in a chart. So the moon, for better or for worse, has in the last couple of millennia been associated with the feminine very often, and because of that there is an awful lot associated with it that is not necessarily positive, you know, in that kind of positive being rational and that kind of thing. It is, you know, if you do tarot, think of the moon card in tarot and how that is sometimes quite a dark card. The moon has possibilities for confusion, for conflicting ideas and ways of kind of interpreting. It's very much a feeling card rather than a doing card. It is a very kind of inward, pulling in kind of card rather than an sign and, you know, and planet. And I know the moon is not a planet. In astrology they called all of the sun, the moon, they called them planets, even though obviously they're not planets, they're luminaries. But yeah, you just kind of have to allow for that. So I will necessarily say planet probably. So the moon is that kind of hidden factor sometimes. Sometimes it can be in shadow because of that, especially if you are in a kind of culture where the more sun, the more kind of rational thinking, more outwardly doing, the more masculine, you know, not actually masculine, but what we have kind of associated as masculine. If you think of the sun card in tarot, it is usually a kind of masculine seeing, kind of almost not warrior like, but it is a very doing card. It is a very kind of positive card, whereas the moon can be seen as a very kind of I'm not quite so sure about this. It's a confusion card. It's a card where things are not yet clear. So we can understand and we can kind of look at that almost from a kind of meta way now, and we can think about it as those characteristics are not necessarily good or bad, positive or negative. So it allows us to think about these things in a more expansive way. So when we're thinking about our sun sign as being the kind of more doing, the more shiny, the more out in the world, and then we can think about our moon as being our more kind of inner expression of self and who we are when we're with nobody else kind of thing. You can see why lots of people become disconnected from their moon sign or never even connect with their moon sign, because that moon is not something which is necessarily valued in our society. I'm still talking about kind of politics and feminism even within the context of an astrology series, but it is because these bodies of knowledge they have been, you know, developed through the lens of patriarchy. So necessarily these things are kind of in there, and we need to unpack them. We need to kind of jailbreak them in order to be able to really see the truth in it. We don't have to be like, oh, our sun sign is our outgoing, masculine, positive self, and our moon sign is our hidden shadow self. We don't need to be like that. We can look at it in a broader, more expansive way. So I feel like I'm slightly repeating myself, but I hope that's kind of made that point. So look at where your moon is. And like I said, if you were born at night rather than at day, sometimes your moon sign can actually be where you feel the most shiny, where you feel you shine the most. And sometimes it's not. And similarly, if you were born at night, sometimes you can be more easily disconnected from your sun. But I really do feel that it's important to be connected to both the sun and the moon. For a long time, I was like really connected with my Gemini sun, really happy with my Libra ascendant. I'm like, yes. And my Taurus moon, I did not want to have anything to do with it at all. I was like, Taurus, sludgy, earthy, slow, you know, no, that is not me at all. And I just really did not connect with it at all. I would even try and wiggle my birth time slightly to try and make my moon also in Gemini, because my moon is on the cusp between the two. So it is really, really close to being in Gemini, but it is not in Gemini, it is in Taurus. So it wasn't until I actually became pregnant and I had my daughter that rooted Taurian moon, just I could fully embrace the weight of it, the responsibility of it. You know, it was something that was very much shadow for me, and it is, my moon's in my 8th house as well, so you know, it's a shadowy house anyway. So it took me a long time, and for that experience, for that kind of rite of passage, for me to be able to connect to that earthy quality. And now I am so, my life is so much more rich because I am in tune with that moon. And it's funny because like I was already doing a lot of kind of moon based stuff and goddess based stuff, but I was doing it from a kind of more airy thought perspective. And then once I connected with that moon, I was able to actually feel it. I could experience it. I could get my hands dirty. It was embodied, whereas before it was conscious. So see where your moon is in your chart. Which sign is it in? Because that will determine how you express your moon. Think about the element of the sign. Think about whether it's cardinal, mutable, you know, all those things we talked about in the signs video. And then look at the house that your moon is in. How is it being expressed? You know, that house is going to show you which, where is it being expressed? Which part of your life is it being expressed in? You know, a 1st house moon is very different from a 10th house moon. It's very interesting. You know, if you have your moon in your 1st house, you're going to have a very kind of moon heavy expression of self as well. So that can be a very interesting placement to have it, and you may connect more with your moon. With the moon, which you don't have with the sun, you know, with the sun we have the sign and we have the house placement, but with the moon we have the sign, we have the house placement, and you also have the phase that the moon was in when you were born. That's something that doesn't get talked about that much in astrology. I haven't seen it talked about that much, but in my own practice, and especially when I was working as a healer with people, I found that their moon sign, particularly for women, I worked a lot with women who were trying to conceive, and their moon sign was very important, because the moon phase was very important, because I found that when their natural cycle, their personal moon time, their blood flow kind of coincided with their birth moon, that actually made it a lot more easy to get pregnant. So, you know, it's anecdotal. I haven't done any double blind studies to kind of confirm this, but I saw it happen again and again and again. So it's interesting. I also found that when people were able to kind of relax and be fully supported, then naturally their body would sync up with their personal moon phase. So, you know, that's interesting. There are sites you can look at. I'm sure the Astrocal, the people that I get my moon diary from, the Astrocal moon diary, have a moon phase calculator where you can put your date of birth in and it will show you the phase that the moon was in when you were born. And like, if you know anything, I'll do a video in this series about the different phases of the moon, but I know I've talked on the channel a lot about moon phases as well. So, you know, if you were born at full moon, then your expression will be very different than if you were born at dark moon. You know, you can see, I'm sure you can imagine how that will impact. So when you're looking at your moon, then you are looking at the sign, the house, and the phase that the moon is in. So take all of those things into consideration. I'm just gonna have a very, very quick scan of my notes to see if there was anything else that I wanted to cover. Okay, I think that's it. So it's homework time. And I've already said it really. What I would like you to do is to to find out your personal. So when you've got your chart, you can see what these things are, and then you can look at what those things mean. So look on your chart, look at that ascendant, where is it, which sign is it in? That is the lens that your whole chart is kind of formed around. That is your first house, and so it will influence your whole chart and also your early life. So that is something to look at. Then when you look at your sun sign, where you shine, look at the placement of your sun, which was it the day or the night when you were born, because that can be interesting too, into how important the sun is in your personal astrology. If it is the daytime, the sun will be in the top half of your chart. If it's the nighttime, the sun will be in the bottom half of your chart. So look at that, look at the sign and look at the house placement, and then look at your moon and look at the sign, look at the house placement and look at the phase, and you will have already got masses of information, and you can start thinking, how does this apply to me? And as a kind of stretch thing, it is good to then look at somebody else that you know very well and look at their placements, because if you just look at your own, your learning curve will take a lot longer. Whereas if you start looking at other people and sort of think, yeah, I can see that in them, it speeds your learning up as well. So, you know, if you're looking to kind of assimilate this information quickly, then that is a really, really good thing to do. So that is it. I've tried to keep it as short and sweet as possible. Next time we will look at the other inner planets. We'll be looking at Venus and Mars and Saturn and Jupiter. I'll attempt to do the 4 in 1, I think. So that is it for now. Warmest blessings, and I will see you very soon.